Good evening, class. This is Mrs. Albright, and tonight we're working on Module 6, Lesson 10. And our objective for this evening is to learn how to use area models and number lines to compare decimal numbers. And we will be recording those decimal numbers using the greater than, less than, or equal to sign. For our first example, we have two decimals here. We have the decimal 15 hundredths and we have the decimal 51 hundredths. Now we can use an area model to decide which of these is the larger decimal. So to start out, I'm going to look at my 15 hundredths, and I know that this has 1/10 and it has 5 hundredths. So I can color that in on my area model here. I can color in my 1/10 and then 5 extra hundredths for a total of 15 hundredths. Now for my next one, this is 51 hundredths. So if I decompose this, this is 5/10 and 1/100. So my area model is going to look different. I'm going to color in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5/10 and then 1 additional hundredth. So I can tell very easily looking at these two fractions, or at these two decimals, that 51 hundredths is greater than 15 hundredths, or I can read this as 15 hundredths is less than 51 hundredths. Now I can also compare these decimals by placing them on a number line. So I'm going to draw a nice big number line. And because neither of these decimals have a value in the ones place, I know that both of these are less than 1 whole. So I'm going to start my number line at 0, and I'm going to end it at 1 whole, and all my decimals will fall somewhere in between here. I'm going to go ahead and mark my 1/2 point, and then I'm going to break this into tenths. All right, so now my number line has been broken up into tenths, and if I look at my fractions here again, I can decompose them so that this is 1/10 and 5 hundredths. And if I decompose this, this is 5/10 and 1/100. So on the number line for this first fraction, 15 hundredths, I'm going to hop 1/10, and then I'm going to estimate my 5 hundredths, and I'm going to put that decimal right about there on my number line. My next decimal, if I look at this, it's 5/10 and 1/100, so I'm going to hop 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's 5/10, and then I'm going to estimate just 1/100th more, just a tiny bit past that 1/2 or that 5/10 mark, and that's where I will put the decimal 51 hundredths. So by looking at the number line, I can see that since this decimal is closer to 1 and that this decimal is closer to 0, I know that this is the larger decimal. So that's just another way I can use an area model, or I can use a number line in order to compare these. This next example is where things start to get a little tricky. Here we have 3/10, and then we have 37 hundredths. And at a first glance, one would think that 37 hundredths would be the larger number because, well, 37 is bigger than 3. When I decompose this, I know that this is really 3/10. So when I color this in on my area model, I'm going to color in 3 whole bars, not just 3 little boxes, because it's 3/10 of this whole. Now this one over here is 3/10 and 7 hundredths. So to color this in, I'm again going to color the 3 whole bars to represent the 3/10, and then 7 additional boxes to represent those 7 hundredths. So now when we look at this, we can see that more of the whole is colored in here, so that we know that 37 hundredths is greater than 3/10. Another way to think about this is rewriting this decimal as 30 hundredths instead of just the 3/10, and that helps you see more clearly that 37 is larger than 30. On a number line, I'm going to draw a nice big one, and both of these decimals are less than 1, so I'm going to start with 0 and I'm going to end with 1 whole, and I'm going to break this into tenths, and we can place these on the number line. So again, this first one is 3/10, so I'm just going to hop 1, 2, 3 times, and that's where it belongs on the number line. My second one is 37/100, which when it's decomposed, that matches up to 3/10, and then I'm going to have to estimate just a little bit past halfway, and that is my 37/100. And so on the number line, we can see that 37/100 is closer to 1 than 3/10 is. So this would be the larger decimal. The last thing I want to talk about, and something important to consider, is when we have numbers such as this, 6 and 37/100, and 2 and 54/100. What do we do to compare these? Well, these, the first value that you want to look at is the ones place. Well, I know that this has 6 ones. This only has 2 ones. So I don't even need to consider the decimal part of it. I can just compare the number in the ones place. I know that 6 ones is greater than 2 ones, so I know that that is larger. Sometimes you will see problems where it is written as a fraction. So here we have a fraction, 25/10, and we want to compare that to 25/10. Well, we know that if we convert this to a decimal, it would be 10/10, 10/10, 5/10. I know that these 10/10 each make up 1 whole, so I have 2 whole, and I have 5/10 left over. So this would be 2 and 5/10. Well, that's quite a bit more than just my 25/100 that I have here. So in this case, my 2 whole and 5/10 would be larger than my 25/100. So make sure that you decompose or rewrite the numbers as necessary if they are given to you in a fraction or a word form. So these are your quiz questions. On this slide, they are all just decimals, so be sure to consider the whole numbers and then the tenths and hundredths to decide whether these are greater than, less than, or equal to, and select the appropriate answer. And finally, these ones are a little more challenging. Some of these are more than 1, some of them are less than 1. Some of them are written in a different form, like 52/10 or 237/100. So make sure you rewrite those fractions as needed so that you can compare these decimals. And again, if you get stuck or confused, don't worry about it. Write down your questions, bring them back to class, and we will continue working on these concepts. Have a great night.